this morning is open space systems. So as mentioned, as promised. So again, I apologize for the last meeting. I was not able to come, but then I already explained it. Um, so after circulation system, we talk about open space system. And these are the definitions of a public open space system according to an American book that I'm referring to, that I use as a reference. So it says that public open space is land that is set aside for public recreation or public resort, or as parklands or for similar purposes. It incorporates active and passive open space. So they have these terms called active open space and passive open space. So active open space is land set aside for the primary purpose of formal outdoor sports by the community, and passive open space is open space that is set aside for parks, gardens, linear corridors, conservation bushlands, nature reserves, public squares, and community gardens that are made available for passive recreation, play, and unstructured physical activity. Okay, so these terms are, as mentioned earlier, taken from a book published in the US. So I decided to um, to show this to you, although uh, the terms active open space and passive open space does not really apply to the Philippines. But then you will be reading a lot of US published books anyway. So you might encounter this, and at least you know, no, that these are not found, these terminologies are not being used in the Philippines. But then there are mentions of like an active recreation and a passive recreation. Okay. Actually, there's no mention here of active recreation. There's just passive recreation. So normally, like the antonym of passive is active. So active recreation would refer to these formal outdoor sports mentioned here. So anything that is used for something organized, especially in terms of sports, um, uh, compared to passive recreation, where play, like your uh, well, the mere idea of playing, running around, unorganized games, even parlor games could fall under passive recreation. Now there are many types of open spaces, and again, some of these do not apply to or not, at least the terms are not being used in the Philippines. But I will comment as we go along. So conservation and heritage spaces are land primarily set aside to protect and enhance areas with significant biodiversity, environmental or cultural values. So I'm actually going to present uh, one such example in Cebu, in the island of Cebu, not only Cebu City, but in Cebu later on. And natural or semi-natural landscapes and amenity, we don't have this in the Philippines. What we have are like buffer zones, as we call them. There are open spaces, but that serves as a buffer between, say, a protective protection area or some other districts. Parklands and gardens. Also, this one is not being used. This term is not being used in the Philippines. It says here land which may have some modifications to support community social interaction, structured recreation, and well-being uses, including for natural appreciation and reflection. So my guess is that these are also very big tracts of land, no, which are for these purposes. Linear open spaces and trails. Now, this one we might have this, although we simply call them easements. Okay, these are linear reserves, often on or alongside rivers and creeks, drainage easements, habitat corridors for shores and some utility areas, for example, or like public pipelines, railways, reserves and power lines. I will also be commenting on this much later. Okay. Active open spaces, land which has been modified to support structures, sports, and recreation. Um, Again, this is another term which is not being used really in the Philippines. Uh, well, actually, I mentioned that earlier, no? Because here in the first slide we have the active open space. But what we do have are civic spaces, which we simply call as parks and playgrounds. So it's like so far we have the conservation or the protective or protection areas, equivalent to conservation heritage. Then we have the buffer zones, which is equivalent to the natural or semi-natural landscapes and amenities. And we have the easements, which are the equivalent of the linear open space and trails. Now parks and playgrounds, which are equivalent to the civic spaces. These are land which has been modified to support a range of informal activities. For example, civic squares, areas, plazas, malls, promenades. And utilities and services, these are similar to our easements earlier. Land acquired zones are proposed to be zoned for open space purposes to protect its assets or to meet identified or community needs. But I think this one, in context of the Philippines, is uh, more applicable to like easements inside in private developments. So undeveloped proposed, these are like uh, infill properties, land which is not no longer used but will be reserved for future uses. So land acquired, zoned, or proposed to be zoned for open space purposes to protect its assets or to meet identified or community needs. Then we have coastal and beaches. So this one is also applied in the Philippines. Open space areas that form part of a foreshore and parklands. And finally, plantations. Or in the Philippines, we simply call them farmlands. Okay, land used primarily for tree growing, but not necessarily for tree growing. For example, here where I am now in Davao City, there are a lot of banana plantations. And in the whole of Mindanao, there are a lot of plantations, not only banana. In Cotabato, we have the pineapple, and then also in Cagayan de Oro, and then somewhere there are coconut, also plantations everywhere. No? Sugar plantations in the Visayas, there's a lot in Bukidnon also. So these are all open spaces. Okay. Now, an open space would serve a particular area, and that's what we call as a catchment. Now, your subdivision project or plate would probably fall into the very smallest of the smallest, no, of the catchment type, which is local or small local. So within a 150 to 300-meter radius, so you have a park which is less than zero point 0.5 hectare or 5,000 square meter. Um, and then the minimum width is like 30 meters. Um, this is actually a very useful data because for a long time, um, a lot of people, especially the faculty, have been looking for a criteria, of course, to determine whether how much parks should be placed inside a in an urban area. For example, Cebu City, we all know that it's well built up, so there are very few parks. But then if we really want to have enough parks, how much is enough? Okay, how much park should be provided? There should be a standard, and because for a long time there has not been so. And then I stumbled in this data, and so hopefully this can be used later on in one of the for research. No? I'm intending to make. There's also the neighborhood catchment, which is around 400 meter in the radius. The size could be between three-fourths of a hectare to 2 hectares. Okay, and then the minimum width to make it more useful is 50 meters. So generally provided for residents in a single neighborhood. Examples could be parklands and gardens. Um, okay, a neighborhood does not necessarily mean a subdivision, so it can be just a conglomeration of residences, no, or residential area. Okay, so there's a lot of that is in Cebu. So there are those that develop without much planning. People just bought properties to build houses, and before you know it, so a big chunk of land is filled up with houses already, and not regulated, unregulated, but they're all under the supposedly the LGU by the barangay, not by homeowner subdivision. Three of those neighborhoods can be served by a park, which is in the US called a sub-district. Okay, um, but then there can also be six of those neighborhoods or a population of 15,000 to 20,000 people served by another park, by an open space, which is around 10 hectares. Okay, so this is now the district. Now, in the context of the Philippines, a district can vary in definition because, for example, in Cebu City, Cebu is divided into two congressional districts, the North and South districts. But then districts can also be applied to a particular area, which is a more common characteristic. For example, you can have a heritage district, or you can say that American period district, so, or you can say the Cebu business district. So but then this had to be defined by law, by an ordinance from the municipality or the city that such and such is a formal district. Otherwise, the designation is more for economic reasons or for planning reasons only, and it's not really has no bearing, at least in legislature. In which case, in planning, you can assign districts and then you can assign an open space. Township is not applicable to the Philippines because we do not really call towns. We have barangays, and then which is the smallest political unit. Um, but then if I don't know whether if that I don't know whether this is applicable to barangay, you know. But if you read on the I forgot what law of the HLURB before. Um, in each barangay, there should be an open space. There's also an open space requirement, but it is not as big as a 10 hectare property. So normally it's very small. Okay, but it says here up to 10 hectares. So maybe from 0 to 10 hectare. But the town, or let's say just equivalent to barangay, should have its own also for the use of the barangay. This is wrong. I forgot to change. This means this is actually municipality. But then in the Philippines, you're either a municipality or a city. So this is also applicable to a city. So a city should also have its own open space accessible to the city dwellers. Okay, might be located a minimum of 2 kilometer distance from residences, so at least 2 kilometers away. So normally these are open spaces where you have to travel to go there. No? It's not like your neighborhood or your local parks where you can still walk. A 400-meter distance is like a 10-minute walk. So it says here that it does not need to be in safe walking distance, therefore to provide car parking capabilities. In Baguio, for example, the Burnham Park, okay, with its parking lots, can be considered as the catchment for that is the whole of the Baguio City. And then we also have region. And for the Philippines, this is applicable because we are divided into regions. Um, in fact, Region 7 includes not only the island of Cebu, but even Bohol and another island, I forgot. But you cannot have a park serving both the three islands. Therefore, each island should have their own. And I'm actually going to show you one for Cebu, which is regional in scale. There's actually another one after this, which is the state. But in the Philippines, that is not applicable because the US has a state which is just one land mass, no, and beside another. But here we do not have this. Even our region is divided into an island, so the whole state, the whole nation, is divided into several or so many islands. No? It's we do not have like a national park in the sense that everyone in the island can go. But we do have a national park actually. I just recalled. I'll show it to you later. Um, this is the Cebu City Central Protective Landscape. Cebu Central Protective Landscape. So no city. CCPL. Cebu Central Protective Landscape. It's called a landscape, but it's actually made up of four big, I don't know how this is called, no? uh, parts, with one small part totally isolated and the three others are contiguous. Okay, so this outlined in bold line is actually protected by law, by Republic Act. I forgot now. So here underneath, you see here Cebu Central National Park and then Sublon National Park. So we actually have a national park. Okay, but then I consider this actually just serving the region, but it does not really serve uh, as in actively serving, but like it's representing a region because protective landscape, you're not supposed to do anything inside the protective landscape. Okay, so you leave it be. You let there's a lot of flora and fauna here, which are sometimes rare. In fact, in the first class I mentioned about this controversy of a teacher in USC who did research on one of the birds, one of the birds which is endemic in this area and which is also quite rare. Experiments are allowed. People can go in and then conduct educational tours, experiments. Experiments is okay if they're merely observing, but what the teacher did is actually to catch some of the birds and even go as far as dissect them to see what they're eating, etc. So they are actually killing the birds already. Okay, so these activities are not allowed. Um, I just want to show this area. I don't know how official this is because I question the pink area, which is alienable and disposable. Alienable and disposable land are land that can be sold, okay, that can be owned by private individuals. And then here, there's a lot. So that's why I'm wondering. But I just wanted to show that, okay, some parts are forest land, some are for reservation, and then there's a big chunk which is the national park, the dark pink here. And now this is how it's being used. This is the existing land use. So you see most of them are vegetables, cut flowers, corn, paddy rice. Then there's also coconut, mango, and shrubs. And there's a few built up areas, okay, around. So it's okay because there are few. And then there's also some forests. So what's alarming about this is that most of the area of the CCPL is made up of shrubs. It should be made up of forest, but instead there are only very few forested areas here. We also have what we call watershed areas. Later on, I'm going to refer back to this. Uh, the colors are the administrative boundaries, like this is Cebu City, and that is, I think, Toledo or Balamban. Yeah. But anyway, this is Balamban. Um, but the watersheds are the one in bold lines, in bold boundaries. So you can see that Cebu City here actually has or five, or is it six uh, watersheds, no? Cebu City watershed, Mananga, and also Sapang Dako watershed along this part. Then Lusaran on the top, and then Kotkot, then Butuanan, okay, which includes Mandaue. Um, Watersheds are like when you connect all the mountains, the topmost part of the mountain at on the peaks and the ridges. So, um, excuse me. Hello, I'm back. So sorry for that. That was actually Shopee. Um, okay, so there are watersheds, no? And then um, watershed is supposed to be protected, but then I'll explain later how this what part should be protected in watershed. I just wanted to um, to open up this one, no? Because aside from the CCPL, we should also be protecting our watersheds because they are the source of water. Okay, fresh water. So a an open space should be suitable, no, for certain use. So it should be provided along foreshores, streams, and permanent water bodies. So rivers, for example, should have, if inside the urban area, should have an easement of 3 meters on each side, okay, before anyone builds something. So it should be linked to existing or proposed future public open spaces where appropriate, because well, where appropriate, because sometimes this is not possible. For Suppose if you have so many parks, it would be good if there is a connection between between each park, no, somehow. If not visual, then maybe through access or specifically if there's a linear part that connects them much better. So it'd be integrated with floodways and encumbered lands that is accessible for public recreation. Normally, open spaces are designed also to control flood. Um, and I think a lot of you have already been to San Carlos, no? To Talamban before the pandemic. Uh, I think the first years wala pa, some of them. But imagine the canteen is in front of an open space that used to be where we hold a lot of activities, but now we have the stadium on top of the mountain there, top of the hill. Um, right now, that is being used as like a water retention area. So because it floods, when it rains, water coming from the mountain go down, and so what the USC is doing is that they try to channel all the water towards that area, and so that gets filled up. But they have not really seen that in action. I mean, getting filled up really like it becomes something like a lake, no? But then, so that's where it's supposed to be filled up and slowly absorbed by the soil. Okay, so that's an open space. Uh, so it has that sort of function. Some open spaces that function. Now, encumbered land, I will define that in the next slide. So open space should be suitable for the intended use. You do not assign an open space for parks and playground if the main feature is a very steep slope. Example, so it's not really suitable, you know, because especially for parks and playgrounds for picnics and families, so you'll have kids being uh, falling into that slope. So open space should be an area and dimension to of an area and dimension to allow easy adaptation to different uses in response to changing community active and passive recreational preferences. I have a slide much later to explain this more. Maximize passive surveillance. We mentioned this in one of the previous lectures, how houses should be around an open space and windows should be looking into the open space so that at any time anyone can look into it and somehow serves as the monitor. Okay. Now, in contrast, an active surveillance are your CCTVs or when you actually have guards watching over uh, the open space 24 hours. No? Uh, so in the Philippines, we could have placed chismosas around. And then so anyone who's a stranger can be easily detected and can be a subject to for gossips. And then people will know about that stranger. So very good Philippines. No? Be integrated with urban water management system, waterways, and what other water bodies. Um, as much as possible, you should have an open space where there is a water body. If you have a lake, so you have an open space around that lake. If you have a river, somehow you have an open space or connecting to that and so all others. No? Incorporate natural and cultural features where appropriate. So the natural feature is understandable, but the cultural feature is something that we is worth considering. Um, I also have a slide later that shows an example of this, not only heritage structures, but anything which is of cultural value can be part of that open space, so that it enhances the both, no, that cultural resource and even the open space are enhanced. The landscaping is enhanced by the presence of that cultural resource. So encumbered lands are land that is constrained for development purposes. So there is a reason for the land, which is development. It includes eastways for power lines, sewer, gas waterways, drainage, retarding basins, wetland, landfill conservation, and heritage areas. Now, power lines. Sure you have seen all those transmission lines from VECO, the very big ones. Um, in principle, there should be an easement from the center 20, and 20 meters for each side, no? To the right and left. So it's a 40-meter easement total where nobody should build. Okay, there are many reasons for that. First is of course for maintenance of the transmission line. Second is that if the transmission line somehow falls, so there's that space where it can fall without hurting anyone. And last is that, of course, the electricity emitted emits a magnetic field, which can be harmful to humans and some animals. So this land may be used for a range of activities. For example, walking trails, sports field, anything which is temporary. This is not provided as a credit against public open space requirements. However, regard is taken to the availability of encumbered land when determining the open space requirements. If there is a criteria that says, like in the subdivision, 70% should be open space. But in our case, it was 70% non-saleable. No? So, but then if it is the specific to open space, so this is not counted among that open space, at least for the US. The Philippines, I think we do count it, from what I understand. But then again, there is no standard that says the municipality or the city should have 70 or 30% open space anyway. So what are the kinds of land encumbrance? You have the flood-prone land, drainage basin, road reserve, easement, and waterways. And then how this might be used. For the flood-prone land, it could be pathway as part of a linear reserve. It could be also informal active recreation or sports training ground. Okay. In the next slide, I'm going to discuss what I mean by a flood-prone land. The drainage basin, depending on the flooding rating or the frequency, could be informal active recreation and or sports training ground. Okay. Um, so it has to be very temporary because every time it rains, so the drainage basin is filled with water, so it becomes dangerous. So therefore, it is not suitable for children's play. The road reserve, I will also be showing you a slide about this, may provide short-term additional green spaces and or for purposes of linkages and pathways. Then there's also the easements where infrastructure exists. It's not suitable for open space. But for example, the power lines that I mentioned to you. So it's not really suitable for any activity, although maybe could be used for a very short period. So where open space under transmission lines or underground suitability may be approved. No? Waterways, water component is not suitable as an open space. So you have a lake, the water part, the lake itself is not the open space, but if there is ground around the lake, that could be that is the open space. So here you see a drawing of say a river. Okay. Now, if you notice towards the right, we have an oxbow lake. Now, because the river naturally uh, actually changes shape. Now, if you look at Cebu, that part of the river which is already in the city does not change shape anymore because of the built up around it. In fact, in most cases, the 3-meter easement is not being followed. You have actually, you even have houses built almost above the river already. So what happens is that as water flows, it carries with it sediments along where it travels. And then as it turns, some of the sediments get stuck to where it's turning, and then it forms an embankment. Okay, and then that's what happened here. And then this Oxbow Lake actually used to be part of the river where the river used to turn. Okay, so this river goes all the way to the Oxbow Lake and then makes a turn and then connects here. What happens after some time is that the river moves slowly, or that sometimes because of a sudden um, addition volume of water, it creates a temporary shortcut which later becomes permanent because although the shortcut was temporary, it keeps on moving. It's like digging on the soil, and then suddenly water finds another path, no, which is easier. So the old part where it turns becomes isolated and forms into a lake, which is called an Oxbow Lake. Okay, so the embankment that forms is called a levee, and then if we actually build a man-made embankment at the sides of the river, we also call that a levee. Okay. Um, so this part, the right and left, you see embankments before uh, land. No, so from that part it goes down. So the river used to uh, like weave itself along this, and then it becomes slowly straight or slowly trying to straighten itself. Okay, which means that if the volume is water is too much for the channel, so it will go beyond the embankments and then rush towards downstream, no? Without regard to the channel anymore. And that's where the problem arises. So it floods this portion, this lower portion. So that's why this is called now the floodplain. Um, One example of a danger that happened regarding this is the one in Cagayan de Oro. It's a very, very big river that forms something like this. It makes a very uh, abrupt turn like this. And then on this portion, um, there is housing development. So I think it's a socialized housing, or maybe it's just a slum area. Okay. So what happened when the river overflowed? So it naturally flowed towards the sea here. So it flowed all all through that housing, that slum area. So a lot of houses got destroyed and a lot of people died. Okay. Because this is supposed to be a no-build zone. You're not supposed to build anything there. This could be good for a um, maybe just a picnic area. This is an open space, no? And then when there is a storm coming or a heavy rain, the government is supposed to evacuate anyone who is picnicking here or do whatever is here uh, because of the possibility of a flood. So what happened? What should happen when you want to develop along the flood area is that so this is the hundred-year floodplain. So before, the 100-year floodplain is like really happens every 100 years, or maybe just a little before. But nowadays with the climate change, so it's happening more often. Therefore, people are so complacent, no? Saying that okay, I will die before that flood comes back, no, over the 100 years. So no, sometimes the flood comes during our lifetime. Um, so with the here the bottom line below the surcharge is the flood level, okay, which is uh, which is what the 100-year floodplain is, no? But then if you want to develop within the floodplain, so you um, you reclaim this part of the side of the floodplain and the other side. So that means that there is water displaced, no, which is the flood water displaced when there's a flood, and then this displaced flood water should be um, will be transferred to this surcharge. Okay, this surcharge should be equal to the displaced water. So therefore, your reclamation should be higher in elevation compared to the top of the surcharge, so that it does not flood the development. Okay, so now this becomes the administrative floodway. So it's a floodway which is not naturally made, unlike the 100-year floodplain, but this is like a man-made floodway. Okay, so going back to the area, the talk about the watershed. So we have this watershed. Not all watershed results in a river. Okay, because the river is actually supplied more from the groundwater, not from runoff water when it rains. So some watershed only have water when it rains, but when there's no rain, so these channels are actually dry. Okay, but precisely this is also necessary to channel water all the way to the mouth to the sea, or to channel water to a particular, if not the sea, maybe a lake, a particular part of the land where it can easily can be collected and then slowly um, absorbed by the soil and recharge the groundwater underneath. Okay, so therefore you have to protect also these tributaries. Okay, because even if you build on it on these little channels here, um, water will naturally seek another path, and form another tributary. And then if not so, if the development is so much here, so you have a flash flood going through the development. A road reserve refers to the easements at the sides of the road. Now, say the Department of Public Works actually have a long-term plan for the roads. Like one road should be, in fact, that road that's the coastal road leading to all the going around Cebu, no? Leading to all the municipalities. I don't know how it looks now, but the last time I was there before the pandemic, so it's only like 4 lanes. But actually, if you look closely, if you travel, you can see some markers at the side saying this is a 20-meter easement beside 20-meter easement other side. So um, there are times that there are roads where DPWH would already mark that point where they're going to widen in the future. Okay, so it could also be like the transmission line where 20 meters on one side, 30 meters on the other side. But meanwhile, you only have something like a 12-meter road. So what happens on the other sides? No? In principle, these are public property, so they can be like green spaces, bike spaces, or like anything. No? But there are some cases where even that portion is considered private properties. Okay, I think the government failed to acquire the lot before someone else did. Um, Example, I experienced that in one of our properties. So when I was asked to design already like a structure, I checked with DPWH and I found out that okay, from that road to certain few meters away inside our property is part of the future expansion, future widening. So we avoided that. So indeed, after several years, they widened the road, so we were spared from demolishing anything. Okay, so you have to um, remember that, no? Um, of course, you bought that piece of property so that when the government started to widen, they have to buy that property from you. Although the disadvantage is they buy it cheaper because it has to be based on how they assess the value. No? And the government assessment of the values of land is different from the private sector. Um, the government is really very low. Easements refer to that part of land which can is used for uh, well, we already mentioned about the easements around the water bodies, but this example um, is for a catch basin for stormwater, which is being channeled to go out to the wetland here. Okay, so there has to be a pipe going from here all the way there, and then that above that pipe there should be no structure. So therefore, that property, there's a line of a property which should be, which is encumbered, what we call encumbered. Um, it happens also like in our subdivision here in Davao City. Uh, the land is rolling, and so in fact our property is like sloping land, but we're facing the lower road. So there's a higher road at the back, and so there is actually a small strip of land which is an easement, no, because there is that similar case, a pipe for stormwater which is being channeled towards the lower road because the drainage continues to the lower road. So the pipes do not usually follow the road. Sometimes it has to take a shortcut, okay, because it's faster this way. Um, so you can have actually it's the planner, it's you as a planner of a subdivision who would put these easements in the case of subdivisions. Otherwise, it's the government who defines this. But in your case, you still don't have the drainage. You're not planning for drainage at a subdivision yet or for a development. So uh, this will not be a problem. So open space planning considerations, we have to follow three principles: accessibility and livability, multifunctional and adaptable, and finally its environment protection and sustainability. So accessibility and livability means that the open space, especially the park, if it's supposed to serve the people, it should serve all the people, regardless of gender, regardless of age, and ability or disability, and regardless of race. For example, so you cannot have a place where foreigners are not allowed or the locals are not allowed. Okay, and so children should be able to play. Those who are on wheelchairs should be able to still enjoy the playgrounds or the park and everything. No? So we should design for that type of park. And then multifunctional and adaptable. For example, in this picture, there's a fair, there's a bazaar, market, a food market. So it's easy, no? You can just set up because you have enough space. So therefore, it's not very good to design a park without a big open space, really, for some activities. And then environment protection and sustainability. So here, there's a lot of things to discuss in this picture. Um, first, first, if you notice, there's this monument. So we mentioned about cultural features being integrated into the open space. So this is, and I mentioned how the the cultural feature and even the park itself complements each other and enhances each other. And towards the right, you also see a church here, an old church. Okay, it's also placed in front of that so that it also complements the park. And then second is that you see here that the road actually continues, but it is like interrupted by the park. So although the cars can go around this park, um, if that's the intention, then they should have just simply closed all of this part, and yet they continue the road here. Actually, this is one of the designs to slow down the cars. Okay, this white part of the park is a ramp going up, and then this gray one is level, then it goes down this white portion. Therefore, a car speeding here would slow down towards the ramp, and then while it's already slowed down, so now it can be more cautious with so many people crossing, and then it starts to speed up again as it goes down and continue on. So that's the purpose of this. Um, we actually did something like this for Cebu. This is the City Hall. The Santo Niño Basilica is here. And then when we designed the plaza was designed by IPD. It was a team of architect Puerto, who already passed away, architect Valenzuela and myself. No? And then uh, this road used to go all the way here with the Magellan's Cross in the middle. So it goes on the other side of Magellan's Cross, no, each lane. But then they closed that off because the vibration due to the cars very near the Magellan's Cross would deteriorate the structure. No? So they made another road here, which is curved to serve that purpose, no? To connect this road and then the other side. So this is a very busy road before. But when we designed the park, um, the mayor then, Mayor Rama, agreed because we wanted to connect the park here. So agreed to our proposal that this one would be paved like the park, but it can be used for traffic, for car traffic. But in the evening, it should be closed down so that this is now really part of the park. People can enjoy it. Uh, so that's how it was designed. But later on, they actually closed it. So they made all the cars go around another place. So this is now completely for people to use. So you might be wondering what's wrong with this design, why this curved road here. So if we had known that this can be closed permanently, we would have probably designed it some other way. So these key considerations are actually simply the steps, no? uh, steps in going over the uh, planning of open spaces. But like any other planning, it follows the same procedure. No? First, you establish a scope, you say what's your purpose and process, and then you assess the existing provision, the existing supply of open space. It's like site inventory, and then you identify the needs. So you ask the stakeholders or the owner what they wanted. Of course, you have to make sure that you engage with the stakeholders, not only with the owners, and then understand influences, drivers for change, and trends in open space demand and provision, because even the stakeholders and the owners cannot predict everything, and what their requirements does not really meet everything. Sometimes, sorry, you have to look beyond. For example, pandemic. We're in a pandemic. How you have to analyze how is the pandemic going to affect the design of this open space? Is this pandemic going to last for so many years? Is this going to be permanent? Or this new normal, is this going to be permanent? So therefore you have to design the open space accordingly. So there are many ways, no? For example, and then gap analysis is when you identify, okay, there's this problem, so how, and then we're supposed to be doing this, so how am I going to do that? So you analyze the gap, and then you develop the strategies. So I mentioned to you about the case where a plaza uh, was changed because of a simple staircase, no? So in front of a building is like the building is on top of is the elevation of the building is higher than the plaza, but then to go down to the plaza you need to take the stairs at the sides, going to the sides of the plaza. Okay, so that the area right in front of the building beneath the stairs is normally isolated, no activity there, and people would go there, urinate or do whatever. No? Um, so the architects decided to just build a stair uh, going down to the plaza right in front. And when they did that, it's okay, the whole thing changed, the whole activity, the way that people use the space changed. So, and immediately that became a very, very busy part, whereas it used to be isolated. So those are strategies that you can introduce. So if you're looking for space, and then there's not so much. So there are opportunities actually to create open space. So car parks can be changed to open spaces. Rooftops can be made into a garden, although these are not actually counted as open space, public open space. But if as planner you wanted open spaces just to let the city breathe, you can also control that because you can put it in the guidelines that those who buy these properties here should have their gardens converted into uh, rooftops converted into gardens. Then you can rezone the road reserve to become open spaces, and or you can put landfill. Okay, so there's a swampy area, so you can put land on it so that you can use the land as part of the open space. I think this is the last, yes. Okay, so um, supposedly I'm supposed to be uh, I'm supposed to give you a quiz after this lecture, like what we did last time, but I was not able to make the quiz. So we will have that quiz after the next lecture, next week on Tuesday. And the coverage would be last meeting's topic and today's topic. What might happen is that I will be posting two quizzes, two separate quizzes for each topic. Okay. So now we're around 22. Um, is there any question before I dismiss the class? Um, I think this week is the Design Awards week. So their activities. Yes, Joanne, you have a question about design. What does the conceptual diagram look like for plate number 2? The conceptual diagram, um, to answer that, I think I need to show you how it looks like. Let me just open the file and so that I can show you an example. It's basically, example, if you are where you want, for example, if you have zones and then how you want to link the zones, and you have to define what those linkages are. Um, Open space guidelines. Yeah. Or maybe it's the other one. Okay lang ah. Mhm. Looking at, it's the other one. Kining 100 ni. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen window. So it looks like this. And then it depends on, oops, sorry. It depends on what you want to show. Okay. Um, so for example, here, what is it trying to show? Compact retail, push to south, flexible development zone within fortune loop, central theme, space along spine. So he's trying to put new context into the development. So uh, he wanted something like uh, flexible development zone here. There's a loop, and then he wants a central seam space along the spine. So there's a spine here, and then this is also a spine. So there's a seam here at the center. So he emphasized it, and then he placed team place, a plaza, and then compact retail. So push to south. So like I think this is what he means, no, by these arrows, or I mean, or this. Anyway, so this is how it looks like. So when he talks about parking, what is the concept? So maybe the roads go here, and then the parking goes to this side. So that's how you park. So that's the conceptual diagram. So whatever you want to explain, you explain through a diagram. So all those strategies that we mentioned earlier. So you mentioned you put into a diagram. Okay, so you let the drawing talk. So sort of. Do we have to make a conceptual diagram for both units and then site dev? I think it's supposed to apply only to site development plan, not the not the houses, because the houses are normally just a uh, very simple, so simple, so no need. Okay, anything else? So this is really how we wanted to relate the design with the um, other lectures, no, and which we're doing now. But before, this is the plan of Sir Yumi Espina. So we lecture here, and then supposedly what you learn you apply in the design. Okay, so if there are other questions, you can just drop me an email. Um, Otherwise, let's take a break already. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming, and see you next meeting.